Welcome back to our road trip video class. Today, we're going to be doing the wave block, which is this block right here. In the pattern, the designer gives you in the instructions how to do it using traditional method of piecing. However, they also give you the pattern for doing it as a paper pieced pattern. I decided to do it as paper piecing because you get a better accuracy by doing it as a paper piecing. So since we're paper piecing, you're of course going to need your pattern that's printed on paper piecing paper. You're going to need your little piece of mylar, your add a quarter ruler, and your tape. Now the instructions for cutting this out will be the same whether you do the traditional method or whether you do the paper piecing. So you don't have to make any kind of adjustments for that. Now, to get started, I want to go over this. This is your cheat sheet. You should have received this in the email that you got. So, when we go down here, when we look at the first column, these numbers coordinate with the numbers that is on your pattern. The next column tells you what color it should be. These two columns tell you what size the pieces were so that you know which pieces to use. So for example, this one says 2 1/4 HST. HST stands for half square triangle. So it means that this piece here is a 2 1/4 inch square that has been cut in half. So we have our half square triangle. This first one is for the 6-inch finished block. The other one is for the 9-inch. Now this in here is the picture. So when you put pieces 1 through 4 together, it should look like that. So then when you add 5 through 8, now your piece should look like this. So you do have a gauge in which you can make sure that you're getting, because the hardest part of doing this block is making sure that your colors are in the right place so that it does create the wave. And believe me, it can be a mess if not, because this is our third time filming it because I messed up the colors the first time. So that's why I'm giving you this cheat sheet so that you won't make the mess that I made. The wave starts with just a 4-patch. We're not going to paper piece that. We're going to use the pieces that were cut in your instructions. What it told you to do was to cut strips that were 1 5/8 inches wide of the background and of the aqua and of the teal. So then we're going to sew it together making strip sets. So we'll have the background in the aqua, the background in the teal. Then we're going to press the seam allowance towards the darker of the two. Now we're going to cut these pieces down into our strips. The first thing we're going to do is we need to straighten up this edge here. So I've got my ruler here, and what I'm doing is I'm going to put a horizontal line on my ruler, and I'm going to put it on the seam line. And then I'm just going to take it, and now I have a perfectly squared off edge. I'm going to rotate the piece. Now, because these each were cut at 1 5/8 inches, we're also going to cut our strips to 1 5/8 inches. Again, I'm going to put a horizontal line on my seam line, and then I find my 1 5/8 inches here, and then I cut it. So now I have the first row of my 4-patch. Then we'll do the same thing with the other one. Okay, now I've got both of my strips, and I want to put it together so that it looks like this. So I'm going to have my background and my aqua, and then I will put this piece here and have my teal and my background. Now, because we have pressed to the darker, my seams will perfectly line up. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and just sew my 1/4 inch seam. So now when I open it up, this looks like this. But I want to show you a little trick on how to iron this. Now, usually when you're pressing, you would just press this to one side. But when you do that, you end up with a little bit of bulk here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here into the center, and there's a couple of stitches that's just past this seam line, and I'm just going to break those stitches open. And when I do that, then this side can go down, this side can go up. You know that you've done it right if you see a little mini 4-patch on the inside. I give it just a quick press, and you notice all of your seam allowances as I go around are all going in the same direction. That way, I have reduced the bulk in the center of my square. We can take these will be used to do your other squares, so we're just going to put those to the side. So now we have completed on our cheat sheet 1 through 4. Now we're going to need to do a little marking on our sheet. So if you have your sheet where it's facing right side up for you, I want you to turn it over, and then I want you to just right top at it. That way, when you go to compare it, as long as that is up top, then your sample will look the same. The next thing that I want to do is I need to mark where my 4-patch needs to go. So I'm just going to take a straight pin, and where these lines meet the square, I'm just going to punch a hole there, a hole here, and I'm just going to mark those 4 holes. And then I'm also going to mark the center. Now when I turn it over, I can see the 5 holes that I just made. And I'm going to draw some registration lines. I want to line up my ruler with these 3 marks. And I'm just going to draw a line. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to do these 3. And that's going to help me to figure out where to place my 4-patch. Go back to the front, and you want to find A1, and I'm just going to put 1 hole with my straight pin through A1, and then A2, I'm going to put 2 holes through it, so that when I flip it over, I know that this is A1, and this becomes A2. Now, in my block, on my cheat sheet, it tells me that A1 is a background, which is this piece here. A2 is aqua, which is this. So I know it's going to sit this way on it. Place a pin in the center, and then I line it up with where the 2 lines match. But I forgot something. I forgot my double-sided tape, because I have to have something to hold it down. I'm just going to put a piece of double-sided sticky tape on each side. Now we're going to go back. Let me get rid of this extra piece of thread here. And I'm going to match up my pin here. Now I have to rotate this because A1 is here, and it's supposed to be a background. A2 is my aqua, so I know it's now in the right position. Now, before I press it down into the tape, I want to make sure that I line up my seam with that registration line. So I've got the top one lined up, I've got the bottom one lined up, and I have my sides. So I just press it on and the double-sided sticky tape will hold it. Now it's time to start adding our squares. We're going to be doing regular paper piecing just like we did last month. Okay, now we're going to start doing our paper piecing. I'm going to punch a little hole just in A5. I'm going to take my piece of Mylar and I want to line it up with the bottom of the triangle. And then I'm going to fold this over, use my add a quarter ruler, and I'm going to cut this down to 1/4 of an inch. I will fold it back, and so my A5, it's kind of a small piece, goes right here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to line up my background piece with it. I want to make sure it's centered, so we can make sure it's centered if I line up the point with my seam allowance, or with my seam. So it's right here. Now remember, when you pin this, to pin from the paper side, because we don't want any pins hidden. So now I've got it pinned, and now I'm going to go back to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew this line. I'm going to start a little bit past this point and I'm going to sew just a few stitches past it on the other side. Okay, now we're going to sew our line, but remember when you paper piece that you always change your stitch length. You want to shorten it just a little bit so that you can get a nice perforated line. So I'm going to drop my needle so that it lines up with this line, and now I'm going to sew. Then I just sew just a few stitches past it, and then I can pull it out. Take it to the ironing board, and I just simply press it out. Okay, we just did piece 5. Now we're going to do piece 6, which is right up here at the top. I'm going to put my piece of Mylar right on the line. I'm going to fold it over. Now remember, we stitched just a little bit past, so you have to pull it down. It tears the paper a little bit, but that's okay. So now I have creased it. I'll take my add a quarter ruler. I'm going to get my 1/4 inch. I'm going to fold it back. Now, our cheat sheet says that piece 6 should be aqua, and aqua is the lighter of the two. I'm going to line it up with this edge. Make sure my point lines up with the seam allowance. I'm going to put my pin through on the back side. And then I'll take it back to the sewing machine. I always like to drop my needle just so that the paper doesn't move around. Now I'm going to sew right on the line at the bottom of piece 6. Then we take it off. And then we press. Next, we're going to put on A7. I'm going to take my piece of Mylar I'm going to put it right at the bottom of my triangle. I'll fold it back, pull my paper down, or my fabric down away from the paper. Cut it down to the 1/4 inch. Piece 7, according to our cheat sheet, says it's supposed to be the background. So I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to line it up with the edge I just cut. My point lines up with my seam allowance, and then I'm going to pin it. And then it's back to the sewing machine. And from the sewing machine to the ironing board. Now we're up to piece 8. We're going to find piece 8 here. I'm going to fold everything over. Pull my fabric away from the paper. Use my add 1/4 ruler. Our cheat sheet says that our next half square triangle is going to be the teal. So I'm going to line this up. I'm going to make sure my point is lined up with the seam allowance. Put a pin in it so it doesn't move. Gets easier the further you go along because the pieces get bigger. And now it's back to the sewing machine. And back to the ironing board. Now I'm going to lay this down so that it's right side up to you. I put my piece of paper so it says top. I look at my picture and you see everything lines up. Now it will look a little different here, and that's because this still has the seam allowance on it. This is the picture that doesn't have the seam allowance, but you want to make sure that you have your aqua here, your teal here, your teal here, and the rest are your background. Now for this, basically what I have done here, you're going to continue doing. You're going to start with your background, starting now with piece 9, and you're going to go around doing 10, 11, and 12, and then make sure that it looks like this. And then you'll go back and you'll start with 13 and do the next round. So it is the same motion going around and around until you finally end up with a completed block. When you're done and you have all 20 pieces sewn onto your paper, then you can go back and trim it on these large dashed line, and you'll have a completed 6-inch block. You're going to need to make 5 6-inch blocks, and then you're going to go back and you're going to make 2 9-inch blocks. Now, because paper is only 8.5 by 11, the entire pattern will not fit all on one page. So what you're going to do is simply on this large dashed line is I'm just going to take my cutter and I'm going to cut it off. Then I'll take it over to here and I'm going to line it up with my other line. You can use your handy double-sided tape and just tape it down, and that will give you your pattern. Your 9-inch block is done just like your 6-inch block. So happy piecing, and then we'll see you in a little bit when we learn to do flying geese.